This is Ranitomia imitator, a poison dark frog from Peru. It's the size of a thumbnail, and the only monogamous amphibian in the world. Some individuals spend their whole lives, from tadpole to adult, in and around bromeliad pools. And high in the canopy, such a pool provides an excellent home. It's relatively safe, and there's a ready supply of food. The plant benefits from the arrangement because the droppings produced by its lodger are a nutritious fertilizer. Bromeliads and the frogs that live in them are only one example of the complex relationships that abound in the rainforests. In tropical forests, the lives of every living thing, both animal and plant, are intimately entwined. It's a tangled web that has evolved over many millions of years. Throughout their history, rainforests have provided plants with a refuge against harsher conditions elsewhere in the planet. So in rainforests, you find some very ancient plant families. This cycad, for example, belongs to a family that certainly provided food for the dinosaurs. But the rainforest is such a rich environment that plants from all stages in their history can still be found here. The first were slimy, thread-like algae that emerged from rivers and swamps to grow on the wet, muddy margins. "40 million years or so later, some developed watertight coverings that enabled them to move onto drier, though still moist, land. They were the liverworts and the mosses. Later still, some of the descendants of those plants stiffened their stems so that they were able to stand upright as they reached up towards the light. They were the ferns and horsetails. This greening of the earth changed the course of life, allowing animals to follow plants out of permanent water. As they spread across the land, the plants pumped out oxygen from their leaves. So from the very beginning, land animals were dependent upon plants, not only for food, but for the very air they breathe. A major difficulty for plants in their new environment was reproduction. If they were to produce fertile seeds, pollen from one had to reach and fertilize the ova, the eggs, of another. Conifers, pines, yews and firs then, as now, used wind. They produced vast numbers of pollen grains, scarcely bigger than particles of dust, which the wind could carry for hundreds of miles. The technique was successful, but very wasteful. Immense quantities of pollen grains had to be produced if just one was to reach its target. But then, about 140 million years ago, some developed a much more efficient way of doing that. With flowers. How this happened was, for a long time, a total mystery to scientists, including one of the greatest. Charles Darwin was baffled by what he called an abominable mystery. The fact that halfway through the age of the dinosaurs, flowering plants suddenly produced a vast number of species, and within a very short period of time. That contradicted one of the characteristics of evolution as Darwin saw it, that it was a slow and gradual process. How could that have happened? From the moment Darwin posed the question, scientists have been striving for an answer. Recent fossil discoveries and modern DNA analysis of species present and past have transformed our understanding of this fascinating period. Using that information, scientists with work pioneered here in Kew have been able to construct the ancestral tree of the whole of plant life. It begins with algae, the simplest of the plants, which are followed by the mosses. The thickness of the rising branches indicates the relative number of species in each individual group. For the first half of the plant's evolutionary history, all the branches of plant life flourished roughly equally. But then, 140 million years ago, there was an explosive radiation of species, Darwin's mystery. These were the angiosperms, flowering plants. Their evolution was more gradual than Darwin had thought, but there is no question that the angiosperms quickly became the dominant group. They diversified into a huge range of species, which have occupied almost every known habitat on Earth. But what happened to stimulate this dramatic radiation? There was a happy coincidence of two events. The first was a doubling in the genetic material of plants, allowing them to evolve more quickly when their environment changed. The second was one such change, the development of a unique relationship between plants and animals. The effect of this coincidence can be seen in one of the very first flowering plants to evolve. This is the water lily house, the hottest and most humid environment in Kew. It was built in 1852 to accommodate the latest botanical discovery, the giant Amazon water lily. Now it's February and the pond is almost bare, but in a few weeks, exotic water lilies of all kinds will be sprouting. The ancestors of today's water lilies, as we know from their fossils, were among the first plants to produce flowers. Bright petals, modified leaves, were an advertisement to flying insects. They signaled the presence of highly nutritious pollen. The shape of the flower worked like a primitive trap, forcing the insects to stumble about and bump into the plant's reproductive structures. In doing so, the insects transferred onto the water lily pollen which they had accidentally collected on earlier visits to other flowers. So now plants could trick insects into transporting their pollen directly from one plant to another with a door-to-door service. The flower of the giant Amazon water lily can close totally, holding the insects captive for several hours, thus making absolutely sure that pollination occurs. Many different species of plant followed suit, each evolving its own particular flowers to attract its insect messengers. Competition for their services drove the plants to diversify. Insects favoured petals that were brighter, scent that was more perfumed, and flowers that had the sweetest nectar. The appearance of such temptations had a huge effect on the insects. They too began to diversify. A multitude of forms could better harness the potential of the numerous species of flower.